The night Nellie Yates rode into Crow's Valley, she did so blind and desperate, following the only light she could see burning through the darkness. A single lantern hanging from the porch of a stranger's homestead, golden and steady as a heartbeat, and she had no way of knowing that the man who hung it there never meant for anyone to find him at all. It was the autumn of 1874, and the territories of New Mexico were not kind to travelers after sundown. The land itself seemed to conspire against the living. The arroyos that looked shallow in daylight became treacherous gullies by night, the scrub brush turned to claws in the dark, and the wind came off the Sangre de Cristo Mountains with a cold edge that could strip the warmth from your bones before you even thought to pull your coat tighter. Nellie Yates knew all of this. She had been raised in the territory, born in a one-room adobe house outside of Las Vegas, New Mexico, to a father who drove freight wagons and a mother who could read the sky the way other women read scripture. She was not a foolish woman. She was not a reckless one. But she was a woman who had been riding for 11 hours straight, whose horse had gone lame on the switchback trail 2 miles before the valley mouth, and whose only compass had broken when she fell crossing the Mora River that afternoon. She was 24 years old, and she was lost, and she was more afraid than she had been in a long, long time. Her horse, a buckskin mare named Tuesday, was favoring her left foreleg badly by the time they descended into the valley. Nellie had been leading her on foot for the last mile, one hand on the reins, the other pressed against her own ribs where she had bruised herself on the saddle horn during the river crossing. The stars overhead were magnificent and utterly useless without a compass or a landmark she recognized. She had been trying to reach the town of Cimarron, where her cousin Dora lived with her husband and 3 children, where there was a bed and a warm fire, and the kind of safety that comes from being known by someone who loves you. She had set out from Santa Fe 3 days earlier, carrying her father's pocket watch, a saddlebag of her personal belongings, and a letter of introduction to a schoolteacher position in Cimarron that she had spent 4 months of careful correspondence securing. She had not expected the storm that rolled through on the first night, nor the washed-out road it left behind. She had not expected the bridge over the Canadian River to be under repair, forcing her 12 miles south to find a crossing. And she had not expected that the darkness would come so fast and so complete, swallowing the valley she had stumbled into Crow's Valley. She would later learn, though she did not know that name yet, leaving her with nothing to guide her except the faint flicker of a lantern burning at the far end of a dirt road. She moved toward it the way a person moves toward warmth in winter, not because she had decided to, but because her body understood that there was no other reasonable option. The homestead emerged slowly from the dark. It was a solid place, more solid than she expected this far from a town. The main house was built of stone and adobe, thick-walled and low to the ground, with a covered porch that ran the full length of the front. There were outbuildings, a barn, a smaller shed, what looked like a smokehouse, all arranged with the practical precision of someone who had thought carefully about how to make a life work in a difficult place. There were flowers growing in a window box that surprised her, pale things she couldn't name in the dark. And there was the lantern, hanging from a hook at the corner of the porch roof, burning with the quiet steadiness of a thing that was tended and maintained with deliberate care. Nellie stopped at the gate, a simple post-andrail affair, and called out the way her father had taught her to approach a stranger's property at night. "Hello, the house," she said, and her voice came out rougher than she intended, scraped raw by dust and cold and hours of disuse. "I don't mean any trouble. I've got a lame horse and I'm a long way from where I'm meant to be." There was a silence that stretched long enough to make her stomach tighten. Then the door opened. The man who came out onto the porch was tall, broad through the shoulders, and carrying a rifle in the crook of his left arm, not raised, not threatening, just present, the way a working tool is present in a working man's hands. He was wearing a heavy canvas shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow despite the cold, and his dark hair was disheveled in the way of someone who had already been asleep and was not pleased to have been woken. He had a beard, close-cropped, and dark eyes that caught the lantern light and held it. He looked at her for a long moment. "You're a woman," he said. "I've been one my whole life," Nellie replied. "Does that change whether your barn has a stall to spare?" He looked past her at Tuesday, who was standing with her weight shifted entirely off the bad foreleg, head hanging with exhaustion. "What happened to her?" he asked. "Twisted something in the fetlock, I think. She stepped wrong in the dark about a mile back. I've been leading her." He set the rifle against the porch rail and came down the steps. He moved the way men who work land move, economically, without waste, every motion purposeful. He crouched at Tuesday's side and ran his hands down her leg with a practiced care that told Nellie he knew horses, and the tightness in her chest loosened, just slightly. "It's the tendon," he said. "She'll need rest and wrapping, but she'll be all right." She didn't bow it. "Thank God," Nellie said, and she meant it with her whole body. He stood and looked at her directly for the first time in a sustained way. She looked back. She was not the kind of woman who looked away first. "Simon Granger," he said after a moment. "Nellie Yates," she said. "Where are you trying to get to, Nellie Yates?" "Cimarron. I took a wrong turn somewhere before dark and ended up here." "I don't even know what valley this is." "Crow's Valley," he said. "You're about 18 miles southwest of Cimarron." She closed her eyes briefly. 18 miles, in the wrong direction. She opened them again and found him still watching her, and she realized that the expression on his face was not irritation, as she had first thought, but something more complicated, a kind of guarded wariness that she recognized as a person who had made himself deliberate about what he let close to him. "I'll pay for the stall and the hay," she said. "You don't need to pay me anything," he said, which surprised her. "Come on. I'll settle your horse and then you can sleep inside. I've got a spare room." "Granger, I appreciate the offer, but I don't want to put you out." He looked at her with an expression that said he found this statement slightly absurd given the circumstances. "You've been walking for an hour in the dark with a lame horse and you're bruised somewhere on your right side from the way you're holding yourself, and the temperature's going to drop another 15 degrees before dawn," he said. "You're not putting me out. You're accepting help that is reasonable to accept." Nellie stared at him. Then she laughed, a small involuntary sound, because he was right and he had said it with such plain directness that arguing felt genuinely silly. "All right," she said. "Thank you." She followed him into the barn, which was warm with the heat of animals and smelled of clean straw and horses. He had 4 horses of his own, 2 working ranch horses. A younger one he was clearly training, and an older one put out to a comfortable retirement, from the look of it. He settled Tuesday in a stall with quick efficiency, packed the tendon with wet clay from a bucket he kept prepared as if lame horses were a regular occurrence in his life, and wrapped it with strips of cloth while Nellie held the mare's head and murmured to her. "You're good with her," he said, watching how Tuesday calmed under Nellie's hands. "I've had her 7 years," Nellie said. "She was my father's horse before she was mine." "Was. He died 2 years ago, influenza." He said nothing, but something in his expression changed, a softening so brief she almost missed it. "I'm sorry," he said. "Thank you," she said. And then, because she was tired and honest and had always found silence easier to fill with truth than with nothing, she added, "I still sometimes reach for him when something good happens, or something bad, old habit." He didn't say anything to that, which was the right response. He just finished wrapping the leg and rose and said, "Come inside. I'll put the kettle on." The inside of the house was as solid as the outside suggested, and more comfortable than she had expected from a man living alone this far from town. There was a stone fireplace that occupied most of one wall and was burning low but steady. There were bookshelves, real bookshelves, built into the wall, holding perhaps 50 books, which was more than she had seen in many homes twice the size. There was a table with 2 chairs, a rug on the floor that had been expensive once, a cabinet with dishes that were plain but intact. There were no feminine touches to the place, no curtains in the windows, no embroidery on anything, But it was clean and it was organized, and it had the feeling of a place that was genuinely lived in rather than merely inhabited. He put the kettle on the wood stove and looked at her standing in the middle of his main room, still holding her saddlebag. "Sit down," he said, not unkindly. She sat. "You said you were going to Cimarron for a position," he said, spooning coffee into the pot. "What kind of position?" "School teacher," she said. "They've been running a school there for 3 years now, but their current teacher is leaving to marry. I've had 4 years of formal schooling myself, and I've been teaching children at the mission school in Santa Fe for the last 2 years." He set 2 mugs on the table and sat across from her. "That's a good thing to know how to do," he said. "What do you do?" she asked. "Beyond keeping cattle, I assume." The corner of his mouth moved, just barely. "Beyond keeping cattle, I run the mail route between Cimarron and Eagle Nest, twice a week. I've been doing it for 5 years." "The mail route," she said, and something clicked into place. "Then you know the road to Cimarron." "Every inch of it," he said. "Could you tell me where I went wrong?" He leaned back in his chair. "You came down through the Pownell Creek Trail." "I think so. There was a creek anyway. There's a fork about 3 miles north of here that looks like the main trail but isn't. The right-hand branch goes up to Cimarron. The left-hand branch goes down into Crow's Valley. In daylight, you'd see the difference. The right branch has a painted marker on a rock white cross about knee-high. In the dark, without knowing to look for it, it's easy to miss." "I missed it," she said. "Most people do," he said. And there was something in his tone that she couldn't quite read, something that went slightly sideways from the plain statement, as if it meant more than it appeared to. She was too tired to chase the meaning of it. She drank the coffee, which was strong and good, and felt the warmth of the fire and the warmth of the mug spread into her chest, and her eyelids began to negotiate with her about continuing to stay open. "Sleep," he said. "I'll show you the room." The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed and a heavy quilt and a window that faced east toward where the mountains would be. She set her saddlebag on the floor and sat on the edge of the bed and pulled off her boots, and she was asleep before she had fully finished forming the thought of lying down. She did not dream, or if she did not remember it. She woke to the smell of bacon and the sound of someone moving around in the kitchen, with the quiet competence of someone trying not to wake a sleeping guest. The light through the east window was pale gold and soft, the particular quality of early morning in the high desert that she had loved since childhood, when it always felt like the world was being invented fresh. She dressed quickly, ran her fingers through her hair, found the small tin mirror in her saddlebag and used it long enough to be certain she looked presentable rather than wrecked, and went out to the main room. Simon Granger was at the stove, and he turned when he heard her. "Morning," he said. "Sit down, there's food." She sat, and he set a plate in front of her, bacon and eggs, and a wedge of cornbread that must have been left over from last night's supper, warmed on the iron, and poured coffee, and sat across from her with his own plate. They ate in a silence that was not uncomfortable, which surprised her a little. She was accustomed to men who felt obligated to fill silence with the sound of their own voices. Simon Granger did not appear to feel that obligation. He ate with the same economy of motion with which he did everything, and he looked out the window occasionally at the light growing on the hills, and he drank his coffee, and when Nellie said, "This cornbread is very good," he said, "My neighbor Mrs. Archuleta leaves me food sometimes. She's trying to save me from myself," with a completely straight face that made Nellie laugh. "Does she succeed?" Nellie asked. "She succeeds with the cornbread," he said. "She has not yet managed to convince me to attend church regularly." "What do you do on Sundays instead?" He looked at her, and she had the sense that no one had asked him that question in some time, or perhaps ever. "I read," he said. "And I ride, and I tend whatever on this place needs tending, which is always something." "What do you read?" He looked at her more carefully now, as if recalibrating something. "History mostly," he said. "Some philosophy, whatever comes through on the mail route that I can acquire. Last month I got hold of a Harper's Weekly that had an essay in it about irrigation systems in the ancient Near East that kept me occupied for a week." "Irrigation systems," she said. The way they moved water, he said, and something in his voice warmed slightly, the way a fire will when you add a good log, steady and quiet. This whole territory, the whole problem out here is water. And those people 2,000 years ago, they solved problems in dry climates that we're still trying to solve. I find it useful to think about. Do you read anything that isn't useful? She asked. The corner of his mouth moved again. Occasionally, he said, when no one's watching. She smiled at that, and when she did, she saw something cross his face, a brief, startled quality, like a man who has stepped on a board he expected to hold and was surprised when it did. After breakfast, they went to check on Tuesday, and the mare was already improved, still tender, but standing on all 4 feet and interested in the hay in her rack. Simon changed the wrapping and showed Nellie what he was doing as he did it, explaining the reasoning behind each step with the patience of a man who takes teaching seriously even when he does not call it by that name. She needs 3 days of rest minimum, he said, preferably 4. Nellie looked at him. I can't impose on you for 4 days, Mr. Granger. Simon, he said, and you're not imposing. I have the stall, I have the room, you can stay. I need to get to Cimarron, I'm expected. You can send word with me on Thursday. I run the mail route Thursday morning. I'll carry a letter to Cimarron, have someone deliver it to your cousin, and everyone will know you're safe and coming as soon as the horse is fit to travel. She looked at him steadily. He met her gaze with the same steadiness. Why are you being this kind to a stranger? She asked, because she was the kind of person who asked what she was thinking when she thought the question was worth asking. He was quiet for a moment, looking at Tuesday. Then he said, because when I first came to this valley, a man was kind to me, and I didn't have a good reason for it either. I've been trying to pass that forward ever since. She believed him. She wasn't entirely sure why she believed him so completely and so quickly, but she did. All right, she said. Thank you, again. You're going to need to stop thanking me, he said, and went back to the house. The next 3 days unfolded with a rhythm that Nellie had not expected and could not entirely account for. She was not the kind of person who could sit still in a place where there was work to be done and simply wait. So on the first morning she asked Simon what he needed doing, and he looked at her with surprise, and then said the garden behind the house was getting away from him. She spent the morning pulling weeds from between the rows of late-season vegetables, squash and dried bean plants, and some tough, determined tomatoes that had survived the first frost, and she found that she liked the work, liked the way it let her mind settle into the rhythm of her hands, while the sun came up warm over the hills. Simon checked on her at midday, bringing a canteen of water, and found her with dirt on her hands and her sleeves rolled up and looking more at ease than he had seen her yet. You don't have to do that, he said. I'm aware, she said. I wanted to. This garden is being neglected. I know it, he said. I'm better with animals than with plants. I can see that. Your horses are in excellent condition and your tomatoes are in open revolt. He sat on the garden wall, a low adobe thing, crumbling at one end, and drank from his own canteen and watched her work. After a while he said, Your father, the freight driver, did he teach you the garden as well? My mother taught me the garden, she said. She could grow anything anywhere. She said it was the most important skill a person could have in this country, knowing how to make food come up out of the ground. She sounds formidable. She died when I was 14. Childbirth, the baby too. She said it plainly, the way she always said it. She had learned early that the plainness of it was a mercy, both to herself and to the people who received the news. Softening it made it harder for everyone. After that it was just me and my father until he died 2 years ago. I have the cousin in Cimarron and a few distant relations in Texas I've never met. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I have a younger brother in Colorado. We write when either of us remembers to. That's the whole of my family. What happened to the rest? She asked, because he had asked her and it seemed fair. He was quiet for longer this time. She kept pulling weeds, not looking at him, giving him the room to answer or not answer as he chose. My father left when I was 11, he said at last. My mother died the year I turned 16. My older sister married a man in Albuquerque and we were close until he decided he didn't care for her being close to anyone outside his control, and now we communicate through my brother secondhand. A pause. She's safe enough. She's not happy, but she's safe. I check. Nellie looked at him. You check, she said. I ride down to Albuquerque twice a year on the pretense of supply runs, he said, and there was a tightness in his jaw that told her what the pretense cost him. She knows I come. She manages to find a way to let me see her for an hour. That's a hard thing, Nellie said. It is, he said, and then, with the abruptness of a man changing a subject before it pulls him too deep, I need to mend the fence on the north pasture this afternoon. If you want something to do this afternoon that isn't weeding. I've never mended fence, she said, but I'm a fast learner. The fence mending took the better part of the afternoon. He taught her how to handle the wire without cutting herself, how to set the staples properly so the wire held taut rather than sagging, how to test each post for rot before trusting your weight against it. He was a patient teacher, clear, precise, not condescending, and willing to simply show her a thing rather than narrating it. She learned better by doing than by listening, and she got the sense he understood that about her without her having to say it. The sun was going low and orange over the western hills by the time they finished, and they walked back to the house side by side on the dirt path between the pasture and the garden. And there was a moment when their hands nearly brushed, and both of them seemed to notice it, and neither of them said anything about it. And the air between them had a quality that Nellie was not ready to name. That evening Simon made beans and salt pork for supper, which was simple and filling, and Nellie found a tin of dried apples in his cabinet and made a quick pan dessert with the cornmeal she found beside it, and they ate together at the table while the fire burned low and the wind picked up outside. Tell me about Cimarron, she said. You ride through it twice a week. What is it like? He thought about it. It's a working town, he said. Mill, some shops, a hotel that's seen better days but functions. The school is small, 12 students last I heard, ranging from about 6 years to 14. The woman who was teaching them, Miss Hartley, she's a capable person. You'll have a lot to live up to. That's encouraging, Nellie said dryly. I didn't mean it as discouragement, he said, looking at her. I meant it as information. You seem like the kind of person who wants accurate information rather than comfortable reassurance. I am, she said. Thank you for treating me accordingly. He looked at her again in that way he had, as if she occasionally said things that surprised him, as if he was still forming an idea of what kind of person she was and kept finding it needed adjusting. The town has a lawman who's competent, he continued. A man named Del Torres, who's been the marshal there for 8 years and knows the territory well. There's a decent doctor. There are 3 churches, which in my experience means there are 3 factions about everything, which in a small town means there's always something happening. He considered. Your cousin's husband, what does he do? He runs the livery stable, Nellie said. His name is Arthur Cole. I've met him twice. He seems like a solid person. Cole's livery, Simon said. Yes, I know him. He's a good man. He'll look after you. I can look after myself, Nellie said, not sharply, just factually. I know you can, Simon said. I've watched you for 2 days. She met his gaze across the table. The fire popped. Outside, a coyote called from somewhere up the valley. You've been watching me, she said, and kept her voice neutral. Something shifted in his expression, not quite discomfort, but a kind of self-awareness, like a man who realizes he has said more than he intended. I notice things, he said. People, how they move through a space. It's a habit from the male root. You're alone a lot. You pay attention to things. What have you noticed about me? She asked, and she was not entirely sure why she was pushing this, except that she wanted to know. He was quiet for a moment that lasted just long enough to be meaningful. You're afraid of very few things, he said at last, but you're careful not to need help in a way that suggests at some point needing help cost you something. She felt that like a hand pressing on a bruise, not painfully but precisely. My father, she said after a moment, when he died, he owed money to 3 different men. Not a large amount, but he owed it, and when he died, those men came to me. They were not cruel about it, most of them. But they expected me to be helpless, and they were already calculating how to arrange things to their advantage, whether that was the debt or otherwise. So I paid every penny, sold the freight wagon, worked double shifts at the mission school for 6 months, and I vowed after that to never be in a position where someone else's help came with strings I hadn't agreed to in advance. "That's a reasonable vow," Simon said. "It's a lonely one sometimes," she said, and then was briefly surprised at herself for saying it. He looked at her. "Yes," he said, "I know the kind." On the second day, the neighbor Mrs. Archuleta arrived. A stout, cheerful woman in her 60s with her gray hair braided down her back and a basket of food on her arm, and an expression of unbridled delight when she discovered there was a woman at the Granger homestead. She took Nellie's hand in both of hers and asked her questions about herself with such warm energy that Nellie found herself answering things she hadn't planned to. And when Mrs. Archuleta turned to Simon with her eyes bright, she said, in a voice loud enough that Nellie couldn't pretend not to hear, "She's lovely, Simon. Where have you been keeping her?" "She got lost in the dark and ended up here," Simon said, with a flatness that might have been discomfort or might have been his face in general. "The best things in my life arrived by accident," Mrs. Archuleta said serenely, and handed him the basket. She stayed for an hour, drinking coffee and talking with Nellie about the territory, about the school in Cimarron, about the history of Crow's Valley, which she told with the kind of storytelling ease that comes from a person who has lived in a place long enough to know all its secrets. "This valley was named for a man named Crow who came through in the 1840s and tried to build a trading post," she said. "He left after 2 years because he said the winters were too long. The winters are not too long. He was simply a man with no patience for the quiet seasons. Simon, on the other hand, is perfectly suited to this place. He has all the patience in the world." "Too much, maybe," Simon said, from where he was examining the bottom of the basket for something she'd packed. "There is no such thing as too much patience," Mrs. Archuleta said firmly, and then she looked at Nellie and she said, "He lights that lantern every night, you know, has for 5 years. I asked him once why, since he lives so far from the road that hardly anyone would see it, and he said, 'What was it, Simon?' 'Habit,' Simon said without looking up." Mrs. Archuleta looked at Nellie with an expression that communicated considerable skepticism about this answer. "He said habit," she told Nellie. "But I think the truth is he's never entirely stopped hoping that someone who needs a way in will find one." Nellie looked at Simon. He had found whatever he was looking for in the basket, a small jar of something, preserves maybe, and he was examining the label with a concentration that was slightly too intense to be entirely genuine. That evening, after Mrs. Archuleta had gone home and supper was done, and the dishes washed, Nellie came out onto the porch to watch the sunset finish and found Simon already there, sitting in one of the 2 wooden chairs that faced west. He looked up when she came out and he didn't say anything, but he also didn't look back at the horizon right away, and she sat in the second chair, and for a while they were both just present with the dying light and the sounds of the valley settling into night. "The lantern," she said at last. "Mrs. Archuleta was right, wasn't she? It's not just habit." He was quiet for a moment. A nighthawk called from somewhere above the tree line. "When I came to this valley 5 years ago," he said, "I came because I'd left a situation in Taos that I needed to leave, and I had no idea where I was going, and it was February and dark, and I was cold and exhausted, and I'd been riding for 8 hours. I came down into the valley and there was a lantern burning on the porch of the old Delgado place. The family that lived here before me, they were an older couple. They'd farmed this land for 30 years. They didn't know me from Adam. But old Mr. Delgado came out and he said, 'Come in, son. There's a fire.' And I came in and they fed me and gave me a bed, and in the morning they offered me a fair price for the ranch because they were moving to live near their children in Santa Fe and needed a buyer who would care for the land properly." He stopped. "So you bought it," Nellie said. "I bought it," he said. "Every cent I had, and some I had to earn over the following year to pay back to Mr. Delgado, who trusted me for it. And I lit the lantern every night after that because I thought, if someone comes down into this valley in the dark the way I did, in the state I was in, I want there to be a light. And you say that's not because you want someone to find their way here, Nellie said. He looked at her, and there was something in his eyes that was unguarded for just a moment, a rawness, a longing so old it had become almost quiet. I told myself I didn't, he said. I told myself I just wanted to return the thing that was done for me. But, she said, he looked back at the horizon. The last of the light was going violet and gray. But I suppose, he said slowly, that the truth is that for 5 years I've been living alone in a place I love and doing work I find meaningful and reading books by firelight and telling myself that is enough, and it has been enough mostly. And I lit the lantern for the people who needed a light because that was the honest thing, the generous thing. But maybe also, he stopped. Maybe also, she said gently. Maybe also, he said, somewhere very deep down in a place I've been very careful not to examine too closely, I was hoping that whoever needed a light might also turn out to be someone who needed to stay. The words fell between them with the soft weight of something that had been held for a long time and finally set down. Nellie looked at him for a long moment. He was looking at the horizon. His profile was sharp and still, and she could see, in the fading light, the lines around his eyes that came from years of squinting into distance, and the set of his shoulders that was habitual bracing against a wind that wasn't always there, and she felt something move in her chest that she was going to need to think about carefully before she said anything about it. That was a very honest thing to tell a stranger, she said at last. You're a good listener, he said, and I've been talking to Mrs. Archuleta for 5 years, and she's wonderful, but she tells me things rather than asking them mostly. You ask things. Is that uncomfortable? She asked. It's terrifying, he said, and he said it so simply and directly that she laughed, and when she laughed he looked at her, and this time he did not look away quickly. Good, she said. I find you a little terrifying too. Why? He asked. Because you say exactly what you mean, she said. I'm not accustomed to it. Was there someone, he began, and then stopped as if he'd caught himself. Was there someone who didn't, she finished. Yes, a man in Santa Fe. We were engaged for a year. He was charming and articulate, and he told me the things I wanted to hear instead of the things that were true, and by the time I understood the difference, a year of my life had been spent in a direction that led nowhere. What happened? He married a woman with more money than me, she said, which I was initially devastated by and am now, on reflection, almost grateful for because she gets to deal with him and I got to go build my own life. A pause. He was not a bad man. He was just a weak one. I'm sorry, Simon said. Don't be. It taught me to pay attention. The darkness had fully come, and Simon rose and went inside and came back with the lantern, which he lit with a match and hung on the hook at the corner of the porch roof, and Nellie watched the light catch and hold, warm against the black of the valley beyond. I think, Nellie said carefully, watching the lantern flame, that whoever you lit this for, they were lucky. He looked at her, and his face in the lantern light was very still and very open, more open than she had seen it yet. You rode into the wrong valley, he said. I'm beginning to think it was the right one, she said. He looked at the lantern. Then he looked at her. Then he looked back at the lantern. Nellie, he said, and something in the way he said her name, careful, as if he was handling something he was afraid of dropping, made her feel it along her spine. I should tell you something. Tell me, she said. When I went to bed 2 nights ago and you called from the gate, I almost didn't come out, he said. I've had visitors I didn't care for. I keep the lantern burning, but I've also learned to be wary of who it brings. And when I heard your voice, I thought about staying inside. But you didn't, she said. No, he said, I didn't. Why? He was quiet for a moment. Your voice, he said finally. The way you said, I don't mean any trouble. Like you meant it not just about tonight, but about everything. Like it was a true statement about who you are. She felt warmth rise in her that had nothing to do with the fire inside. It is, she said. I know, he said. I've been watching, remember. She looked at him, and he looked at her, and the lantern swung gently in the night wind, and something was beginning between them that neither of them was going to be able to unhappen. no matter how carefully or cautiously either of them was inclined to be. The next morning, Simon rode Thursday's mail route. He left before dawn, as he always did, riding a different horse than his usual, because he was going to be covering 25 miles and he rotated them carefully. And before he left, he set out bread and coffee fixings for Nellie and wrote down the name of her cousin and what he planned to say in the letter he would carry, and she approved it with one addition. She wrote her own note to Dora. A brief thing that said, "I am safe and well, and have been properly cared for by a person I think you would approve of, and I will be there by week's end." And he folded it into his leather mail bag and rode north in the pre-dawn dark. Nellie spent the morning with Tuesday, who was visibly improved and eating with appetite, and then she went back to the garden to finish what she'd started, and then she sat on the porch in the afternoon sun with one of Simon's books, a history of Spanish colonial administration in New Mexico, that she found genuinely interesting and read until the light went amber. He returned in the early evening, a little dusty and tired but not particularly showing it, and she had found enough in his kitchen to put together a proper supper beans again, but with onion and dried chilies from the strings that hung in the back of his pantry, and a skillet bread she was particularly good at. And when he walked in and smelled it, he stopped in the doorway for a moment with an expression that she could only describe as someone who had been surprised by something good. "You cooked," he said. "I cook," she said. "I should have done it before now. Sit down." He sat and ate, and the expression on his face as he ate made her want to laugh again. "When did you last have someone cook for you?" she asked. "Mrs. Archuleta," he said, "but she mostly drops food off. We don't eat together." Before that, a pause. "A long time ago," he said. "That's not a life, Simon," she said, and said it gently but directly, the way she said everything. "That's a very organized and self-sufficient solitude, and you are obviously very good at it, but it's not a life." He looked at her. "No," he said, "I know it isn't." The letter reached Dora Cole in Cimarron on Thursday afternoon, carried the last leg from the post relay by a boy who knew the Coles. Dora sent back a return message with the Friday mail, which arrived at the Granger homestead the following morning via a different relay rider who stopped at the gate and handed it to Simon and looked with frank curiosity at Nellie standing on the porch behind him. The message from Dora was a single line. "Tell me everything about the man who lit the lantern," with an underline beneath everything that was 2 strokes deep. Nellie folded the paper and said nothing to Simon about the underline. Tuesday was ready to travel on the 4th day, which was Saturday. Nellie packed her saddlebag with the careful efficiency of someone who had been packing her own bags since she was 14, checked Tuesday's wrapped leg herself with what Simon allowed was a competent assessment, and came out to find that Simon had saddled his own horse. "You don't have to ride with me," she said. "I know," he said. "Simon, I know the road and you don't," he said. "I'll ride with you to Cimarron and come back. It's not a long ride." She looked at him for a moment. She thought about arguing. She thought about her vow regarding help that comes with strings. She weighed the two and decided that some help simply did not come with strings, and that recognizing the difference was its own kind of wisdom. "All right," she said. They rode north out of the valley in the morning light, side by side on the switchback trail, and when they reached the fork where the 2 paths diverged, Simon pointed out the white painted cross on the rock without being asked, and she looked at it and understood completely how she had missed it in the dark. "In daylight it's obvious," she said. "Everything is more obvious in daylight," he said. They rode in a comfortable quiet broken by occasional conversation. He told her about the landscape they were moving through, the history of particular formations, where the water was in drought years and where it wasn't, the kind of deep localized knowledge that a man acquires from 5 years of riding the same ground twice a week. She told him about the school in Santa Fe, about the children she had taught there, the particular rewards and frustrations of working with small minds that are in the process of becoming large ones. She was good at the work. She knew she was good at it. And when she talked about it, the thing that happened to her face was something Simon watched with attention. "You love it," he said. "I do," she said. Is that evident? Your whole face changes, he said, and then looked slightly forward again. She smiled at the path ahead. They came into Cimarron in the early afternoon, and it was exactly as Simon had described, a working town, neither pretty nor ugly, built for function with occasional accidental charm. There was a mill with its wheel turning in the creek, a main street of maybe 8 buildings, a scattering of homes and outbuildings extending in all directions. Children ran in the street. A dog slept in a square of sunlight outside the general store. A man on a horse nodded at Simon as they rode past and gave Nellie a curious look. Cole's livery was at the south end of the main street, and before they reached it, the door of a house across the way burst open, and a woman who looked enough like Nellie to be immediately recognizable as family came out at something approaching a run. "Nellie!" she cried, and Nellie swung down from Tuesday and was grabbed and held in a fierce embrace that Nellie returned with equal fierceness, and they held on for a moment while Simon sat on his horse and looked at the middle distance with the tact of a man who understands that some reunions need their own space. "I was so worried," Dora said into Nellie's shoulder. 3 days, Nellie." "I know. I'm sorry. I'll explain everything." Dora pulled back and looked at her cousin's face with the sharp inventory of someone who has been worried sick and is now doing damage assessment. "You look well," she said, slightly accusingly. "You look remarkably well for someone who's been lost in the wilderness for 3 days." "I was only lost for the first night," Nellie said. "The other 2 days I was being looked after." Dora looked past her at Simon on his horse. Then she looked at Nellie. Then she looked at Simon again. "Is that him?" she said, in a tone she clearly intended to be sotto voce, and which carried approximately to the other side of the street. "That is Simon Granger," Nellie said. "He runs the mail route between here and Eagle Nest. My horse went lame and he housed me and tended Tuesday until she was fit to travel. He rode up with me today to make sure I found the way." Dora's expression as she processed this was a study in suppressed delight. "Mr. Granger," she called, loud enough that Simon looked at her directly. "I'm Dora Cole. I owe you a tremendous debt for taking care of my cousin." "She was easy to take care of," Simon said, and Nellie both felt and refused to feel warm about this. "Come in," Dora said, with the authority of a woman who ran her own home and knew how to mean an invitation. "Come in, both of you, and let me feed you, and then you can tell me everything." Simon looked at Nellie. Nellie looked at him. "Come in," she said, "please." He came in. Dora's husband Arthur Cole appeared within minutes, a quiet, solid man with red hands from his work and kind eyes who shook Simon's hand with the recognition of someone who knew him by reputation, and was pleased to confirm that the reputation was earned. "Good man," Arthur said simply. "Good livery," Simon replied, and they regarded each other with the mutual respect of working men who do not need to say more than that. They ate, and Dora asked questions at a rate that Nellie had forgotten was possible, and Simon answered them with a patience that impressed Nellie, and Arthur occasionally said something brief and accurate that cut to the center of things. And by the time the meal was done, Dora was looking at Simon Granger with an expression that Nellie recognized as her cousin's internal expression of approval, which she had seen applied to very few people in her life. Simon rose to leave in the late afternoon. He needed to get back before dark. He had animals to see to, a ranch to check on. Tuesday would need her evening wrap changed. He shook Arthur's hand. He accepted Dora's warmth with grace, if with slight discomfort at its volume. He came to where Nellie was standing on the porch, and they were for a moment alone enough that the rest of the world felt a step behind them. "Thank you," Nellie said, "for everything." "You already have a rule about saying that," he said. "I'm making an exception," she said. "It seems warranted." He looked at her. She looked at him. The afternoon light was very gold and very particular, the kind that made everything it touched look like something worth keeping. "Cimarron isn't so far from Crow's Valley," he said after a moment. 18 miles, she said. "I ride through here twice a week," he said. "I know," she said. He nodded once, the way he did everything with decision. And then he went to his horse and mounted with the easy grace of someone who has climbed into a saddle 10,000 times, and he rode south down the main street, and Nellie watched him go until he turned the corner and was out of sight. "Oh," said Dora from directly behind her. "Don't," Nellie said. "I'm not saying a word," Dora said. "You're saying several thousand words with your face." "I can't help what my face does," Dora said. "Come inside. I'll make tea." Nellie settled into Cimarron life with the same purposeful energy she brought to everything. The school was a single-room building behind the Baptist church, solid enough, with 8 long benches and a blackboard and a stove that needed its pipe replaced before winter set in properly. She spent her first week meeting the families of her students, learning the shape of what had been taught and what still needed teaching, replacing the stovepipe with the help of 2 fathers who showed up on Saturday morning with tools and goodwill and excessive opinions about the best way to run a pipe joint. She lived with Dora and Arthur for the first month while the small house that was part of her teaching arrangement, a 2-room adobe at the edge of town that had been used by the previous teacher, was cleaned and made habitable. She was, by any measure, doing exactly what she had set out to do. She was building a life on her own terms in a new place, and it felt good and right and solid, the way proper foundations feel when you walk on them. And Simon Granger rode through Cimarron twice a week, on Tuesdays and Thursdays, carrying the mail. On the first Tuesday she saw him, she was at the general store buying supplies for the school, and he appeared at the door of the post office across the street. He saw her and raised a hand in acknowledgement. She raised her hand back. That was all. On the following Thursday she was on the school porch with 2 of her students who were staying after hours when he rode past, and he caught her eye and nodded, and she nodded back, and the 2 students looked between the teacher and the passing rider with the particular perceptiveness of children. On the following Tuesday she was at the post office herself, collecting a letter from a friend in Santa Fe, when he came through the door with his mail bag. He stopped when he saw her, and she turned from the window, and for a moment they were both standing in the same small room, and neither of them said anything because a lot of things were happening in a small space at once. "How's Tuesday?" she asked. "Fully recovered," he said. "She's in better condition than before you got lost." "That seems like a backhanded way to say something," she said. "How is the school?" he said. "It's good," she said. "I have 12 students and they're all different in interesting ways. I have a boy named William who has read every book he can get his hands on and is absolutely starving for more. And I have a girl named Clara who cannot sit still to save her life but has the most remarkable memory for anything she hears. I'm already trying to figure out how to teach the same thing 15 different ways so each of them can find the one that fits." He was watching her face in that way he had. "You love it," he said again. "I do," she said. "I really do." "Good," he said, and there was something very simple and very genuine in his voice. "That's good, Nellie." She liked the way he said her name. She had been noticing for 3 weeks how much she liked it, which was not useful information but was also insistently present. "Will you?" she said, and stopped and marshaled herself, because she had a vow against needing help and she had made her peace with exceptions, but this was a different kind of thing. "On Saturday, I'm going to ride out and look at the school building situation regarding firewood for the winter. The man who was supposed to arrange the supply apparently didn't, and I need to figure out what we're actually working with. Would you want to ride out with me? You know the territory better than I do." He looked at her. "I'd want to," he said. They rode out on Saturday in the bright cold of a New Mexico autumn morning, and they found the situation with the firewood more concerning than she'd hoped and less dire than she'd feared. And Simon knew a man at a sawmill 3 miles east who would sell cord wood at a fair price and deliver it with a week's notice. And they stopped at the mill, and she negotiated the arrangement herself, while Simon stood slightly behind her and managed his expression with what she could tell was some effort because he found it admirable and was trying not to show it too much. On the way back, they stopped at a rise that looked south and west over a sweep of valley that was turning to its autumn colors, the scrub oak going russet and bronze, the cottonwoods along the creek channels turning a yellow so bright it looked like something imagined rather than real. It's beautiful country, she said. It is, he agreed. I've ridden through it so many times I sometimes forget to see it. How does a person forget to see that? She gestured at the view. You look at the road instead of the view, he said. You think about the next thing, the horses, the route, the weather. It's a habit of men who have work to do. I'll make you a bargain, she said. You remind me to look at the school instead of just the problems in it, and I'll remind you to look at the view. He looked at her. That's an unequal trade, he said. The view doesn't need much reminding. Humor me, she said. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, all right, it's a bargain. They shook on it, gloved hand in gloved hand, and neither of them let go quite as quickly as the completion of a handshake required. After that, Saturdays became a pattern. Not every Saturday she had her own work. He had his ranch, but most Saturdays, or the majority of them, Simon Granger rode the 18 miles from Crow's Valley to Cimarron and knocked on the door of the small adobe house at the edge of town where Nellie Yates lived. And she had usually already put the coffee on because she could set her clock by the fact that he arrived at 9:30. They rode. They walked. They sat in her small house or at Dora's large table, and they talked about everything under the sun: books, the territory's political situation, the particular challenges of teaching children of different ages in a single room, the philosophy of irrigation, and how it applied to the problem of the Sangre de Cristo watershed, the unjust treatment of the Hispanic and Pueblo communities in the territory by the Anglo-dominated land grant system that had been grinding people off their ancestral land for years, which Nellie had opinions about that were sharp and specific, and Simon shared with a quiet, sustained fury that came from watching it happen at close range for 5 years. The Maxwell land grant situation, she said one Saturday evening in November, when it had turned cold enough to make the small stove in her house earn its keep. My father lost 2 freighting contracts because the land grant company bought the roads. It wasn't a government action. It wasn't a legal proceeding, they just bought it. And when the Hispano families who'd been farming that ground for 3 generations tried to assert their claims, the company hired men to make it difficult. I know it, Simon said, and his voice had that quiet edge to it. 3 families in the valley near me lost ground they'd worked for 40 years, all through 1871 and 1872. One of those families was the Archuletas. Mrs. Archuleta, her husband's family land, not the house, they hold that clear, but the eastern grazing ground, they never got it back. He stared at the fire. There are things in this territory that are not right, and the law hasn't been useful in addressing them, and that is a fact that I find very difficult to sit with. So do I, Nellie said. I keep thinking, if I teach these children well, if the Archuleta children and the Torres children and all the rest of them get the same education as anyone else, if they know how to read a contract and understand a legal document, that's not a fix, but it's something. It's something they can carry. He looked at her with that look she had come to know well, the one that meant she had said something that went into him somewhere deep and true. It is something, he said. It is. She had 12 students, and within them were Hispano children and Anglo children, and one boy whose family was Apache and Hispano both, a child of 2 worlds who sat in the back row and watched everything with eyes that missed nothing, and who Nellie had gone out of her way to make feel wanted. His name was Marco, and he was 10 years old, and he was the second fastest reader she had ever encountered in a child his age. Simon met Marco one Saturday in December when he came to the school to help fix a window frame that was letting cold air in, and Marco watched him work with focused interest and then said, "You're the male writer," with the directness of a child who doesn't see a reason to approach things sideways. "I am," Simon said. "Do you ever carry letters for Indian Agency?" Simon looked at him carefully. "Sometimes," he said. "Why?" "My grandfather sends letters," Marco said. "Sometimes they don't arrive." "Marco," Nellie said softly. "It's a fair observation," Simon said to her. Then to Marco, "I carry every letter I'm given. I can't promise what happens before they reach me or after they leave Cimarron, but everything that goes in my bag I deliver." Marco considered this for a moment with the gravity of a child conducting a judgment, and then he nodded. "All right," he said. "Thank you." Simon repaired the window with Nellie handing him nails and holding the frame while he worked, and when they were done and alone again he said, "That's a remarkable child." "He's extraordinary," she agreed. "All of them are in their way." He looked at her. "You see every single one of them," he said. "You actually see them." "They're right there," she said, slightly puzzled. "Most people look at a room full of children and see a problem to be managed," he said. "You look at that room and see 12 specific people." She thought about this. "My mother was like that," she said. She remembered names. She remembered what mattered to each person. She said it was just paying attention, but I think it was something more. I think it was actually caring. You can pay attention without caring and you get information. You pay attention when you care and you get people." He was looking at her very seriously. "Nellie," he said. "Yes," she said. "I need to tell you something." Her heart did something she was going to have to examine later. "Tell me," she said. "I've been riding 18 miles every Saturday for 2 months," he said, "and I'd like you to understand that it's not the scenery." She felt warmth rise in her like a fire that has been careful but is now being asked to stop being careful. "Simon," she said, "I know you have a vow about not needing people," he said. "I know you built a life that works without depending on anyone, and it's a good life, and I'm not asking you to take it apart. But I would like to ask permission to be something that is added to that life, rather than something you depend on. I would like to court you, Nellie, if you'll let me. Honestly and openly, with your cousin and her husband knowing and Mrs. Archuleta knowing, because I've never been very good at secrets and I don't want to be. I want to court you properly." She looked at him for a long moment. Her face was doing what it did when she was feeling something very large and being precise about it. "You are already courting me," she said. "You have been for 2 months." He blinked. "Have I?" "The Saturday rides," she said. "The coffee already on when you arrive." "Simon, we have been doing this for 2 months. You are now asking permission for something that is already well underway." He thought about this. And then, for the first time in her experience of him, he laughed a real laugh, surprised out of him, full and warm, and it changed his face so completely that she caught her breath at it. "I suppose we have," he said. "Permission granted," she said. "Retroactively." He was still laughing when he looked at her, and she was smiling, and the winter light through the repaired window was very cold and very clear, and something between them settled into a shape that was definitive and good. He had told her honest things before. Now he began to tell her everything. He told her about Taos, where he had spent 4 years before coming to the valley, the failed business partnership that had cost him his savings and most of a friendship, the woman he had thought he was going to marry, and who had very reasonably decided she did not want to be married to a man still so raw and confused about what he wanted that he couldn't have named it on command. He had come to the valley with $30 and a horse and a set of skills and nothing else, and the Delgados had given him the thing that allowed everything subsequent to exist. "I was ashamed for a long time about how badly Taos went," he said. "I am not ashamed anymore. It was a situation that required more of me than I had at 23, and I did my best, and it was insufficient, and I learned from it, and I am not that person anymore. But I was for a long time very careful about not letting anything get close enough to fail again." "The lantern," Nellie said. "You kept it far enough away that you could give light without receiving it." He was quiet. "Yes," he said. "That is probably the truest description of it." "It must be very cold," she said. He looked at her. "Giving light without receiving it," she said. "It was," he said simply, "until you rode in out of the dark." She had been waiting for the right moment to tell him what she felt, because she was a precise person about words, and she wanted the ones she chose to be the true ones. "Simon," she said, "I need to tell you something in return." "Tell me," he said, echoing her back to herself. "I have been very careful my whole adult life about what I want," she said. "I've been careful about it because I've been mistaken before about the difference between wanting something and wanting the idea of it. The man in Santa Fe, I wanted the idea of him. What I felt for the idea was real, but the idea was not the man, and by the time I understood the gap between them, I had wasted a year grieving a person who had never quite existed. "I'm listening," he said. "I've been watching you for 3 months," she said. "The actual you, Simon, not an idea. You are patient and you are honest, and you are more tender than you let yourself show, except in the things you do, which show it constantly. The way you treat your horses, the way you listen to Marco, the way you drove 18 miles every Saturday without asking for anything in return. And I have been watching you, and I am not confused about the difference between you and an idea of you. You are very much a specific, actual person, and I am," she stopped, breathed. "I am more certain of what I feel for you than I have been of anything in years." The room was very quiet. "What do you feel?" he said, and his voice was careful the way hands are careful around something that matters. "I love you," she said. "I think I've been loving you since you crouched down in the dark to check Tuesday's tendon." He crossed the room in 2 steps and he took her face in his hands, and he looked at her for a moment with an expression of such complete and particular wonder that she felt it like a physical thing. And then he kissed her gentle and certain, the way he did everything, with decision and care, and she kissed him back. And the stove ticked in the cold room, and outside the winter wind moved through Cimarron, and everything was very good. He proposed to her in February, 4 months after they had officially acknowledged what both of them had known since autumn. He did not do it with theatrical gesture. He was not a theatrical man, but he was serious and deliberate about it, and he asked her on a clear morning on the rise south of town, where they had stopped once to look at the autumn colors, now all bare branch and cold blue distance, and he said her name, and then he said, "I don't have a great deal to offer in the material sense. I have a homestead that I love and that I believe could be more with 2 people in it than it is with 1. I have work that is useful and provides adequately. I have strong feelings about irrigation, and I love you in a way that I intend to keep on the right side of honest about for as long as you will let me." "That last part is the important one," she said. "I know," he said. "Will you marry me, Nellie?" She had thought about what she would say when this moment came, because she was the kind of person who thought about things, and she had several different possible answers prepared. But when the moment came, the only one that felt adequate was the simplest and most true. "Yes," she said. "Absolutely yes." He took her hand and held it, and they stood on the rise in the February cold, and looked at the long distance of the territory they were both, in their different ways, already home in. They were married in April of 1875, on a Saturday that arrived with the particular generosity of New Mexico spring, warm and full of the smell of blossoming things, the air clean and bright after a gentle rain the night before. The ceremony was held in the Baptist church in Cimarron, because the minister there was a decent man who had known Dora for years, and who performed the service with genuine warmth and appropriate brevity. Dora cried through most of it with the full commitment of a woman who has been waiting for this outcome and is vindicated. Arthur Cole stood next to Simon as his witness, with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had taken a person's measure and found it right. Mrs. Archuleta came the 18 miles from the valley and brought so much food that the celebration after could have fed twice the gathering, and she cried also, though she denied it firmly to anyone who asked. Marco brought wildflowers, which Nellie kept. The celebration went long into the afternoon, and when it was finally done, and the gifts, practical things, blankets and kitchen tools and seeds for the garden, had been loaded into the wagon Simon had brought, and the goodbyes had been said, and Dora had held Nellie for a long time and whispered several things in her ear that Nellie laughed at even through the tears she was surprising herself with. They drove south out of Cimarron in the golden late afternoon light, with 2 horses trailing behind the wagon. They drove south toward Crow's Valley, toward the lantern, toward home. The homestead was different with 2 people in it. Not noisier necessarily, though it was that sometimes laughter occupies more space than silence, and they laughed, the particular private laughter of people who know each other well enough to find the same things funny for the same reasons. But more than noise, it was fuller. It was full in the way a house becomes full when it is also a home, when the rooms have meaning because specific, irreplaceable people move through them. Nellie kept her position at the Cimarron school. She rode in on Monday mornings and came back Thursday evenings, staying with Dora the nights she needed to, and Simon adjusted his mail route days to put one of them on Thursday, so they arrived back in the valley from different directions at roughly the same hour, and had established the habit of meeting at the gate as if they had merely been in different parts of the same very large property. She extended the garden. He helped. She was better with plants than him, and she knew it and he knew it, and they had established an understanding whereby she directed, and he executed without complaint, because he trusted her judgment in her domain of expertise, the way she trusted his in his. The garden produced abundantly that first summer, squash and beans and corn and the tomatoes, finally properly disciplined, yielding more fruit than two people could eat alone, which led to the productive project of learning to put up jars, which Mrs. Archuleta supervised with the authority of a woman who has been doing this for 50 years and does not tolerate shortcuts. In November of that year, Nellie told Simon she was pregnant. She told him on a Tuesday evening after supper, sitting at the table where they had first talked over coffee on the morning after she had arrived. She said it plainly because she was a plain person, and she watched his face. His face did the thing she had seen it do on very few occasions. It went completely unguarded, everything at once, and what was there was joy so complete and so vulnerable that she felt her throat tight. He reached across the table and took her hand. "Are you well?" he asked. "You're feeling well." "I'm feeling perfectly fine," she said. "A little tired in the mornings, otherwise fine. I'll ride for the doctor in Cimarron this week." "Not necessary yet, Simon." "Nellie." "I said not yet," she said, and he recognized the tone and accepted the boundary, which was one of many reasons why she loved him. "Soon, then," he said. "Soon," she agreed. She kept teaching through the winter. The school board had two opinions about this, which divided predictably along the lines of who thought a woman's primary purpose was domestic, and who thought the school's needs were also a consideration. Nellie presented her case with such organized clarity and such an obvious lack of apology that the dissenters on the board found themselves without much remaining ground to stand on, and the compromise reached was that she would continue through the spring and designate a competent substitute available if needed. The substitute turned out to be Mrs. Archuleta's daughter-in-law, a young woman named Rosa who had been a student herself 6 years earlier and who proved to be excellent with children in the way some people naturally are, and who became from that experience Nellie's voluntary assistant even after Nellie returned full-time. The baby came in June of 1876, a boy, born on a warm summer morning with the window open and the smell of the garden coming through. Nellie did not have an easy labor, and Simon spent the night before at her side with a useless steadiness that was nevertheless exactly the right thing, because she had asked for it and he was there. The doctor from Cimarron was present, and Mrs. Archuleta, who served as midwife and authority figure and general manager of the process with a firmness that even Nellie was too tired to argue with. The boy arrived healthy and loud and red in the face. Simon held him with the particular careful wonder of a large man holding a very small person, and Nellie, exhausted and happy and slightly undone by everything that had just happened, watched her husband's face and thought, "There it is. There is all of it. What do we name him?" Simon asked, and his voice was not quite steady. "I've been thinking about Robert," Nellie said. "For my father." He looked at her. "Robert Granger," he said, trying the weight of it. "Robert James Granger," she said. "James for yours." His mother's middle name, which he had mentioned once in the context of something else entirely, 4 months ago, and she had remembered it because she was Nellie Yates Granger and she remembered what mattered. He could not say anything for a moment. He looked down at Robert James Granger, who had decided the world was interesting enough to observe with eyes not quite focused yet. "That's a good name," Simon said, finally. I think so, said Nellie. Robert proved to be a child of great personality from the very beginning. He was quiet and observant for the first months, and then something engaged, and he became the loudest room in every house. He had his mother's eyes and his father's jaw, and an independence of spirit that seemed to come from both of them in equal measure, which meant he needed watching. Nellie went back to the school that autumn, with Robert in a basket in the corner of the classroom for the first months, which the students found tremendously more interesting than their arithmetic, and which Nellie leveraged ruthlessly as a teaching tool. By winter he was old enough to be left with Rosa for the mornings, and Nellie taught her full days again with the focused energy of someone who loves her work, and has also discovered that loving her work and loving her family are not competing priorities but parallel ones, each making the other more possible. Simon, for his part, was a father in the same way he was everything, with complete seriousness and present attention. He was home enough from the ranch and the route to be genuinely present, not just occasionally visiting the life happening around him. He read to Robert before the child could understand words, because he believed words got into a person early and stayed, and when Robert was older he brought him on the male route, setting him in front of him on the saddle with small serious hands on the horn, teaching him the names of things they passed, the rock formations, the water sources, the plants that were edible and the ones that weren't, the same deep localized knowledge he had shared with Nellie on that first ride north. The years moved through the valley with the rhythm of the land. The garden expanded and became known in the area for what it produced. The school in Cimarron grew 15 students, then 18, then a proposal for a second room that Nellie wrote the board case for and won. Rosa became fully employed, and Nellie mentored her with the same attention to the individual that she brought to the children. The mail route continued, twice a week, and the territory changed around it in the way territories do: more settlers, more roads, more argument about what the land was for and who it belonged to, the usual contested and often unjust grinding of history. The lantern burned every night on the porch of the Granger homestead in Crow's Valley. This did not change after Nellie arrived, and it did not change after Robert was born. She had asked Simon once, the first autumn after they were married, whether it still needed to burn. Yes, he said simply. Why? Because someone might still be out there in the dark looking for a way in, he said. And it doesn't cost me anything, and it might cost them everything not to see it. She looked at him for a moment. I love you, she said simply. I know, he said. And then, because she had told him before but he knew it bore saying, I love you too, completely. 3 travelers found the valley through the lantern in the years after Nellie arrived. One was a young couple with a broken wagon wheel who needed shelter for a night and help with the repair in the morning, which Simon provided. One was an old man traveling alone who was ill with a fever and who stayed for 10 days while they cared for him, and who recovered and moved on and sent a letter from Raton the following month that began with the words, I owe my life to the light on your porch. The third was a woman with 2 children, and a story she didn't tell all of but didn't need to. They stayed for a month, and when they left, it was to go to Cimarron, where Dora Cole had found them a situation and a degree of safety. Nellie was the one who wrote to Dora about that last one. Simon was the one who hitched the wagon and drove them in. They were, in the clearest possible sense, a team. Robert grew. He was 4, then 6, then 8, with a younger brother, Edmund, arriving in 1879 when Robert was 3, and a sister, Clara, named for the girl in Nellie's classroom who couldn't sit still and remembered everything, arriving in 1882. The house, which had been built for 1 and was adequate for 2, became deliberately expanded in 1880. Simon and Arthur Cole and 2 other men from the valley spent 3 weeks adding 2 rooms to the east side, and the stone they used came from a quarry on the Archuleta land, and Mrs. Archuleta supervised the construction of the new kitchen addition, with the same authority she brought to every project she was involved in. The school board in Cimarron had a new concern in 1881. The territorial superintendent of education had issued a directive about curriculum standards that Nellie disagreed with in 3 specific and articulable ways, and she wrote a letter to the superintendent that was 20 pages long and completely polite and absolutely did not yield on any of the 3 points. Simon read it before she sent it and said, "You're going to get a response," and she said, "I know," and she sent it anyway. She got a response. It led to a meeting in Santa Fe. She went by train now, the AT and SF having come through in 1879, and the meeting led to a conversation with the superintendent that was productive rather than adversarial because Nellie was not adversarial by nature. She was simply not wrong, and when you are not wrong in ways you can demonstrate clearly, most reasonable people eventually come around. The directive was amended. 2 of her 3 points were incorporated. She returned to Cimarron with the satisfaction of someone who has done a difficult thing properly, and also a new arithmetic textbook she had found in Santa Fe that was considerably better than the current one. She was 31. Simon was 34. The valley was full in autumn, the cottonwoods along the creek bright enough to hurt to look at. There was an evening in October of 1881 that Nellie remembered, in years to come, as one of the most precisely happy evenings of her life, though nothing dramatic or memorable happened in it. Robert was 6 and Edmund was 2, and the baby Clara was not yet born. After supper, Simon was reading at the table with Robert in his lap, tracing the words in the book with his finger while Robert followed, because Robert was learning to read and was taking to it with the same greedy urgency his mother brought to books. Nellie was at the stove, not because she had to be, but because she was making something with the dried apples and the last of the summer's honey that she had been thinking about for a week. And Edmund was on the floor with a wooden horse that Simon had carved for him, conducting some complex private drama that he narrated quietly to himself. The fire was burning and the lantern was lit on the porch and the window was dark with the good dark of a night with all the stars out. And the house was warm and specific and full of the people she loved best in the world. She looked at it all, the full, warm, specific fact of it, and thought, this is the thing. This exact thing is what the lantern was for all along, not the travelers who found it, not the light in the dark for strangers, though that mattered and continued to matter, but also this, the inside of the house that the lantern made findable. The life that a lost woman had ridden into in the dark, following the only light she could see, and had discovered was exactly the right one, even though she had ridden into the wrong valley. Especially because she had ridden into the wrong valley. She put the apple pan in the oven and went to the table and sat across from her husband and her oldest son, and Robert looked up and said, "Mama, look, I can read this part," and he read it, stumbling only once with his father's hand steady and warm on his back. "You can," she said. "You can read it." Simon looked at her over their son's head, and everything that had been said and done and felt between them in 7 years was present in that look. The dark night she arrived, and the lantern, and the coffee, and the months of Saturdays, and the vow she had been afraid to break and then broken the right way, and the proposal on the cold February rise, and the wedding in the spring and the births and the arguments and the reconciliations and the ordinary Tuesdays and the extraordinary ones and all of it. All of the living they had done together and would continue to do. "Good," Simon said quietly, and she wasn't sure if he was talking to Robert about the reading or to her about everything, but it didn't matter because the answer was the same. Everything was good. Everything was, in the most fundamental and lasting sense, very good. The lantern burned on the porch all that night and every night after, and the valley was full of its warm and particular light, reaching out into the dark for anyone who might need a way in. And inside there was a fire, and there were people who loved each other, and there was the sound of a child reading haltingly but bravely, and there was the smell of apple and honey from the oven, and the creek was running somewhere in the dark distance, and the mountain stood over everything patient and enormous. And this, precisely and specifically and permanently, this was home.